Imagine this. You're sitting in a room of infinite possibilities, surrounded by technology that connects you to the entirety of human knowledge, creativity, and expression. You have more access to information, entertainment, and opportunity than any human being who has ever lived before you. And yet, there you sit, scrolling mindlessly, feeling nothing. The strange emptiness of being simultaneously overstimulated and underwhelmed. The peculiar heaviness of having everything and wanting none of it. The paradoxical prison of infinite choice. You call it boredom. But what if that's the most dangerous misdiagnosis of our time? What if that dull ache, that restlessness that follows you from screen to screen, job to job, relationship to relationship, isn't boredom at all? What if it's something far more significant, the sound of your unlived life knocking at the door of your consciousness? The human mind wasn't designed for the strange reality we've constructed. We've built a world of ceaseless stimulation, yet we find ourselves increasingly numb. We've created endless options, yet feel increasingly trapped. We consume more content than any generation before us, yet starve for meaning. This isn't a failure of entertainment. It's a failure of understanding what we truly hunger for. Consider the unsettling truth. Your chronic boredom persists, not despite abundance, but because of it. The more options presented to the modern mind, the more paralyzed it becomes. The more information available, the less we feel we know. The more connected we are, the more profoundly alone we feel. When was the last time you felt genuinely alive? Not merely distracted or temporarily amused, but fully present, electric with the voltage of authentic experience? When did you last lose track of time, not because you were escaping your life, but because you were so deeply immersed in it? Your boredom is trying to tell you something. It speaks in the language of emptiness, but its message is one of fullness. It points not to what's missing in your environment, but to what's untapped within you. What if boredom is actually a form of grief, mourning for the potential you sense but haven't expressed? What if that persistent feeling of not enough isn't a deficiency in your circumstances, but a recognition of capacity within yourself that remains unused? There's a reason why the most privileged societies often report the highest levels of existential ennui. Material comfort and endless distraction have solved our surface problems while exposing our deeper ones. We've conquered scarcity only to discover that abundance creates its own peculiar form of poverty, a poverty of purpose, of meaning, of vital engagement with life. The ancient Greeks had a concept they called acedia, a state of listlessness, of not caring, of spiritual sloth. The Desert Fathers considered it among the most dangerous of human conditions, not because it was dramatic or violent, but precisely because it was so subtle. It didn't announce itself as sin. It disguised itself as mere discomfort. Yet they recognized what we've forgotten, that this quiet desperation signals a profound disconnection from our deeper nature. You scroll and scroll, searching for something that will finally break through the glass wall between you and authentic feeling. But what if nothing external can solve this internal misalignment? What if your boredom is actually a sophisticated internal compass pointing toward your unlived life? This isn't comfortable to consider. It's far easier to blame our dissatisfaction on insufficient entertainment, inadequate circumstances, or the inherent emptiness of modern existence. It's easier to seek another distraction than to face the possibility that your boredom is actually a crucial message from your deeper self, a message about potential unfulfilled, capacity unused, and gifts unexpressed. But what happens when we finally listen to what our boredom is trying to tell us? What truths lie beneath that flat, gray feeling that follows you from one distraction to the next? And most importantly, what awakens when we stop misdiagnosing this condition as a problem to be solved through consumption and recognize it as a signal pointing toward transformation. To understand this fully, we must first excavate the hidden architecture of chronic boredom, the psychological and philosophical underpinnings that explain why, in a world of unprecedented opportunity, so many of us feel so painfully disengaged from our own lives. The architecture of chronic boredom is far more complex than most of us imagine. We've been conditioned to see boredom as a simple absence, a void to be filled with activity or distraction. But the great psychological and philosophical minds throughout history have recognized something deeper at work, something that speaks to the very core of human existence. Friedrich Nietzsche understood this when he observed that boredom is the dream bird that hatches the egg of experience. Far from being a meaningless state to escape, he recognized boredom as the precursor to depth and creativity. Yet modern society has taught us to fear this state, to run from it at all costs. The moment the dream bird appears, we chase it away, with notifications, entertainment, and noise. Never allowing the egg of experience to hatch, your chronic boredom persists, because paradoxically, you never allow yourself to be truly bored. You've learned to fear the emptiness, to escape the silence before it can speak to you. Each time you reach for your phone at the first twinge of discomfort, each time you fill a quiet moment with noise, you're interrupting a psychological process that wants to complete itself. Carl Jung recognized this pattern when he wrote about the shadow, those disowned parts of ourselves that we refuse to acknowledge. Your untapped potential lives in this shadow realm, and boredom is often its attempt to communicate. When you feel that peculiar combination of restlessness and lethargy, of wanting something without knowing what, you're experiencing the friction between the life you're living and the life that wants to emerge through you. This is what Sartre meant by his famous observation that hell is other people, not that human connection is torture, but that we adopt external standards and patterns that alienate us from our authentic possibilities. Your boredom may be telling you that you're living according to borrowed values, pursuing goals that don't resonate with your deeper nature, expressing only the parts of yourself deemed acceptable by others. Consider how Viktor Frankl, having survived the concentration camps, came to understand that the primary drive in human beings is not pleasure or power, but meaning. He witnessed how those who could maintain a sense of purpose could survive conditions of unimaginable suffering. Yet here you are, surrounded by comfort and convenience, feeling disconnected and disengaged. Why? Because your life may be materially sufficient but meaningfully malnourished. The existentialists understood that existence precedes essence, that humans are thrown into a world without inherent meaning and must create significance through their choices and commitments. Your boredom may be the existential vacuum that Frankl identified, the awareness, however dim, that you have not yet made the choices that would give your existence weight and direction. There's a neurological component to this as well. Your brain is wired for novelty and challenge, for learning and growth. When you fail to engage with life at the edge of your capabilities, what psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi called flow, your neurological reward systems begin to dull. You sink into a state where everything feels flat, not because it is, but because you're not engaging with it in a way that activates your full cognitive and emotional faculties. Arthur Schopenhauer observed this pattern in human desire, noting that we oscillate between boredom and pain. When our desires are unfulfilled, we suffer. When they are fulfilled, we grow bored and need new desires. But what if there's a third state beyond this pendulum? What if genuine engagement with your potential could break this cycle entirely? Aldous Huxley foresaw our current predicament with uncanny accuracy in Brave New World, where citizens were kept docile not through oppression, but through pleasure and distraction. Actual happiness always looks pretty squalid in comparison with the overcompensations for misery, he wrote. Your chronic boredom may be the last remaining signal that you haven't yet succumbed completely to the anesthetizing comforts of modern life. This isn't just personal. It's profoundly cultural. We live in what philosopher Byung-Chul Han calls the burnout society, where achievement has replaced meaning as the primary metric of a successful life. We exhaust ourselves in pursuit of goals that, once reached, leave us hollow. We confuse productivity with purpose, accumulation with fulfillment. Is it any wonder that beneath this frenetic activity lies a deep, persistent boredom? The consequences of misdiagnosing this condition are severe. When you mistake your existential boredom for a simple lack of stimulation, you treat it with the very poison that created it: more content, more distraction, more noise. The entertainment you consume to escape your boredom only deepens it, creating a dependency that grows more profound over time. Like drinking salt water to quench your thirst, each attempt at relief only intensifies your condition. What your boredom reveals, ultimately, is not a deficiency in your environment, but a displacement from your purpose. It is the symptom of a life that has all the external trappings of fulfillment while lacking its essential substance. It is the feeling of being a spectator to your own existence rather than its primary author, and herein lies the deeper danger, the longer you misinterpret this signal, the more difficult it becomes to hear it correctly. Like the body adapting to chronic pain, the psyche can normalize chronic disengagement. What begins as an uncomfortable feeling pushing you toward authentic expression can, over time, harden into resignation. A quiet acceptance that this is simply how life feels. But beneath this resignation, something else is happening, something with profound implications for your identity, your relationships, and your entire experience of being alive. The true cost of chronic boredom extends far beyond wasted time or missed pleasures. It reshapes your very sense of who you are and what you're capable of becoming. What happens to a human being who exists in prolonged states of disengagement? The consequences extend far beyond merely feeling unpleasant. They systematically reshape your neurology, your perception, and ultimately, your identity itself. Consider what neurologists now understand about neuroplasticity. Your brain physically reconstructs itself around your habitual patterns of attention and engagement. When you consistently fail to deeply engage with life, neural pathways associated with passion, curiosity, and focused attention begin to atrophy. Meanwhile, circuits dedicated to shallow processing, novelty-seeking, and instant gratification strengthen and expand. Your chronic boredom isn't just a feeling. It's becoming anatomically encoded in your brain's physical structure. This is how the trap solidifies around you without your awareness. What begins as occasional disengagement gradually transforms into your default state of being. The less you engage deeply, the less capable you become of deep engagement. Your attention span shortens, your capacity for nuance diminishes. Your threshold for stimulation rises until ordinary human experience, with all its subtle textures and quiet revelations, begins to feel unbearably flat. You find yourself caught in what psychologists call the hedonic treadmill, constantly needing stronger, more intense stimulation just to feel baseline satisfaction. Yet, no external stimulus can ever provide what's missing, because what's missing isn't in your environment. It's in how you're relating to your environment, to yourself, and to your own capacity. The most insidious consequence is what this does to your self-concept. Human beings form their understanding of their capabilities through experience. When you consistently avoid challenging engagement, you systematically limit your evidence of what you're capable of. Over time, your sense of possibility contracts. Potential strengths remain theoretical rather than lived. You begin to identify with your limitations rather than your capacities. This explains the strange comfort many find in their own disengagement. There's a peculiar safety in lowered expectations. If you never fully invest yourself, you never fully risk failure. If you never pursue what deeply matters to you, you never have to face the possibility that you might not measure up to your own ideals. Psychologists call this self-handicapping, subconsciously creating conditions that provide an excuse for potential failure. Your boredom serves as the perfect alibi. I could do amazing things if only I could find something interesting enough. This protection comes at a devastating cost. The untested life feels secure but tastes of ash. The consequences ripple outward, from the personal to the relational. When you're chronically disengaged from your own experience, you become incapable of true presence with others. You might physically attend social gatherings while remaining psychologically absent. Conversations become performances rather than genuine exchanges. Intimacy becomes increasingly difficult because real connection requires precisely the vulnerability and presence that chronic disengagement helps you avoid. On a societal level, masses of disengaged individuals create what sociologist Robert Putnam called bowling alone, communities with high connectivity but low actual connection. We see the consequences all around us. Political discourse that favors outrage over understanding, entertainment that prioritizes sensation over meaning, technological advances that connect devices while isolating humans. This collective disengagement creates fertile ground for manipulation. When people are disconnected from their own values and capabilities, they become more susceptible to external definition. Marketing doesn't just sell products, it sells identities to those who've lost touch with their own. Political extremism doesn't just offer ideologies, it offers purpose to those starving for meaning. The chronically bored become the chronically influenced. The cognitive biases that maintain this state are powerful. There's the sunk cost fallacy that keeps you invested in paths you've already traveled, even when they no longer serve you. There's status quo bias that makes the familiar discomfort of boredom seem safer than the unknown discomfort of change. There's confirmation bias that selectively notices evidence supporting your limited self-concept while filtering out contrary information. Perhaps most powerful is what psychologists call the availability heuristic. We judge the likelihood of possibilities based on how easily examples come to mind. When you've spent years in disengagement, examples of your own passion, focus, and achievement become increasingly remote in memory. Your capacity for engagement doesn't disappear. It just becomes harder to recall, harder to believe in, harder to access. The most tragic consequence is the slow death of wonder. The chronically bored don't just miss out on pleasure, they miss out on awe, on reverence, on the sacred dimension of existence that makes life more than mere survival. When you can't deeply engage with your experience, the extraordinary becomes ordinary, the miraculous becomes mundane. You develop what philosopher Joseph Pieper called acedia, a spiritual apathy more profound than mere laziness. This deadening of perception creates a feedback loop. The less wonder you experience, the more you seek intensive stimulation. The more intensive stimulation you consume, the higher your threshold becomes for feeling anything at all. The higher that threshold rises, the more everyday experience seems insufficient. And so, the cycle continues, narrowing your perceptual bandwidth until life itself seems inadequate to the task of capturing your attention. What's essential to understand is that this isn't happening because something is wrong with life. It's happening because something has gone awry in how you're participating in life. The world hasn't become less wonderful. Your capacity to experience wonder has atrophied from disuse. And herein lies both the danger and the opportunity. Your chronic boredom isn't just obscuring your potential. It's actively reshaping you into someone progressively less capable of fulfilling that potential. Yet, within this very danger lies a profound possibility. If learned disengagement created this condition, learned re-engagement could reverse it. This brings us to the critical question: how does one break free from a state that perpetuates itself? How do you escape a trap made of your own perceptual habits? What would it mean to rebel against not just external constraints, but the internal architecture of disengagement that has been quietly constructing itself within you? The liberation from chronic boredom requires something more radical than new hobbies or better time management. It demands a fundamental rebellion, not against external authority, but against the internal architecture that has domesticated your wild nature and dulled your senses to the extraordinary possibilities that surround you. This rebellion begins with a counterintuitive first step. Stop trying to escape your boredom. Instead, move toward it. Examine it with curiosity rather than aversion. The next time that familiar emptiness surfaces, resist the automatic reach for distraction. Sit with the discomfort. Listen to what it's trying to tell you. Boredom, when finally allowed to speak, often reveals specific information about what your life is missing, not in terms of entertainment, but in terms of meaning, challenge, and authentic expression. Remember Nietzsche's dream bird that hatches the egg of experience. When you stop interrupting your boredom with distraction, you allow that hatching to occur. The initial discomfort gives way to something else, often first to restlessness, then to curiosity, and finally to genuine interest that arises not from external stimulation but from internal engagement. This approach inverts conventional wisdom. Society tells you that interest precedes engagement, that you must first find something interesting before investing your attention. But the deeper truth is that engagement precedes interest. When you commit your full attention to almost anything, hidden dimensions reveal themselves. The world doesn't become more interesting. You become more interested. Consider the practice of deep work advocated by Professor Cal Newport. The ability to focus intensely without distraction is increasingly rare and increasingly valuable. Those who cultivate this capacity don't just accomplish more, they experience more. They discover that concentrated attention acts as a doorway to states of flow, where time seems to both compress and expand, where the boundary between self and activity temporarily dissolves. History offers us powerful examples of those who broke free from the prison of disengagement. Consider Viktor Frankl in the concentration camps, finding purpose in even the most extreme circumstances by choosing his response to suffering. Or Helen Keller, who despite being deaf and blind from early childhood, developed such extraordinary engagement with life that she wrote, "Life is either a daring adventure or nothing at all." Look to Martha Graham, who revolutionized modern dance not in her youth, but beginning in her mid-30s, proving that engagement isn't the domain of the young, but of the committed. Or to Buckminster Fuller, who at age 32, standing at the edge of Lake Michigan contemplating suicide, instead decided to embark on an experiment to find what a single individual could contribute to changing the world and benefiting all humanity. These examples aren't meant to inspire temporary motivation, but to illustrate a fundamental truth. What separates a life of deep engagement from one of chronic disengagement isn't circumstance, but orientation. It's the difference between asking, "What can life offer me?" and "What am I bringing to this moment?" This shift in orientation requires specific practices. First among these is the deliberate cultivation of difficulty. Your brain evolved to engage deeply with meaningful challenges, not with passive consumption. Seek out activities that place you at the edge of your current abilities, not so difficult that you become overwhelmed, but not so easy that you remain unchallenged. This zone of proximal development, as psychologist Lev Vygotsky called it, is where growth occurs and where engagement naturally deepens. Whether you're learning an instrument, mastering a craft, developing a skill, or building a relationship, the sweet spot of engagement lies just beyond your comfort zone, where effort is required but progress is possible. Another counterintuitive practice is the restoration of constraints. The modern world offers unprecedented freedom and choice, but the paradox of choice reveals that too many options often lead to less satisfaction, not more. Deliberate constraints, whether it's limiting your consumption options, focusing on depth rather than breadth, or committing deeply to a single path. Don't restrict freedom, but focus it, allowing for deeper engagement rather than perpetual sampling. Perhaps most radical is the practice of presence, of treating each moment not as a means to some future satisfaction, but as an end in itself. This isn't about manufacturing positive emotions, but about developing the capacity to be fully with whatever is arising, pleasant or unpleasant. It's about recognizing that life doesn't happen in some imagined future when everything is finally perfect. It happens only in a continuous series of present moments, each of which offers its own invitation to engagement. These practices run counter to dominant cultural narratives that equate happiness with ease and fulfillment with consumption. They will be met with resistance, both external and internal. Friends may not understand your decreasing interest in distraction. Family might interpret your growing selectivity as judgment, and your own conditioned patterns will rebel against this reclamation of your attention and energy. This resistance is not a sign of failure, but of effectiveness. It indicates that you're pushing against the very forces that created your disengagement in the first place. Remember that your chronic boredom didn't develop overnight. It was the accumulated result of thousands of small choices, most of which you weren't fully conscious of making. Your liberation will similarly emerge from thousands of small choices, but with a crucial difference. These choices will be intentional, aligned with your deeper values rather than with default patterns. What awaits beyond the resistance is something few in our distracted age ever experience: the rediscovery of your own vital engagement with life, not as a temporary state to be chased, but as your natural condition when artificial barriers are removed. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about excavating who you've been all along beneath the layers of disengagement and distraction. But to complete this journey, there's one final revelation, perhaps the most profound of all, about what your boredom has been trying to tell you, and what it reveals about not just your potential, but about the nature of human existence itself. Here is the revelation that changes everything. Your boredom is not a mistake. It is not a flaw in your psychology or a failure of your circumstances. It is a fundamental feature of consciousness itself, a necessary counterpoint to engagement that exists for a profound evolutionary purpose. What you've been experiencing as a problem to solve is actually a capacity to honor. The ultimate truth is that boredom exists as an evolutionary alarm system, a built-in signal that emerged not to torment you, but to protect you from the greatest danger a conscious being faces: living beneath your potential. This isn't a metaphor. Throughout human history, those who remained disengaged from their capabilities became vulnerable to predators, to competing tribes, to environmental changes that required adaptation. Your boredom exists because for millions of years, those who listened to it survived and thrived, while those who ignored it perished. When properly understood, chronic boredom reveals itself not as an enemy, but as your most loyal advocate, the part of you that refuses to let your life shrink to fit within comfortable boundaries. It is the voice of your unlived life demanding expression. It is your potential experiencing itself as pain when denied and as pleasure when fulfilled. This reframes your entire relationship with disengagement. What if your boredom is actually a sophisticated guidance system calibrated through millennia of evolution, designed to navigate you toward your unique contribution? What if that restlessness you feel isn't meaningless discomfort, but a precise compass pointing toward your authentic path? Consider how this changes everything. You haven't been failing at being engaged, you've been succeeding at recognizing misalignment. Your discomfort isn't evidence of something wrong with you. It's evidence of something right with you. It means your internal guidance system is functioning exactly as designed, refusing to let you settle for less than what you're capable of becoming. This is what the philosopher Martin Heidegger meant by authentic existence, living in accordance with your deepest nature rather than with external expectations or convenient distractions. Your boredom is calling you toward authenticity, toward the life that only you can live, the contribution that only you can make. The German word unheimlich, often translated as uncanny, literally means unhomely. Your chronic boredom is precisely this feeling of being unhomed, of recognizing that you are not fully dwelling in your own existence. But this discomfort isn't telling you to find a different home. It's telling you to inhabit this one, your life, your body, your unique moment in history, more completely. This perspective reveals the profound irony at the heart of modern existence. We've created a world of unprecedented comfort and convenience, while simultaneously dismantling the conditions that make deep engagement possible. We've optimized for ease rather than meaning, for entertainment rather than participation, for consumption rather than creation. The result is a peculiar form of suffering that has no name in our cultural vocabulary, the suffering of unused capacity, of potential recognized but unexpressed. Ancient wisdom traditions understood this better than we do. The Tibetan Buddhists spoke of the hungry ghost, perpetually consuming but never satisfied. The Desert Fathers wrote of acedia, the noonday demon that makes the richness of existence seem flat and uninviting. What they recognized, and what modern psychology is rediscovering, is that human beings have a fundamental need not just for pleasure or comfort, but for meaningful engagement, for the experience of directing their full capabilities toward purposes that transcend their immediate satisfaction. The great psychologist Abraham Maslow, after studying the highest human functioning for decades, eventually realized that self-actualization, the fulfillment of one's unique potential, wasn't the pinnacle of human development. Beyond self-actualization lies self-transcendence, the dedication of one's actualized self to purposes larger than self-interest. Your boredom may be calling you not just toward greater self-expression, but toward meaningful contribution. This is the ultimate liberation from chronic disengagement, recognizing that what you seek isn't more stimulation, but more significance, not more consumption, but more creation, not more convenience, but more meaningful challenge. The antidote to boredom isn't entertainment, but purpose, not the temporary purpose of distraction, but the enduring purpose of devotion to what deeply matters. When you finally see your boredom through this lens, something remarkable happens. The very discomfort that once felt like an indictment of your circumstances reveals itself as an affirmation of your capacity. What felt like emptiness reveals itself as potential space, not vacant but pregnant with possibility, awaiting your creative engagement to give it form. This isn't abstract philosophy, it's intensely practical wisdom with immediate implications for how you live. It means recognizing that the question isn't, how do I find something interesting enough to engage with? But how do I bring the fullness of my engagement to this moment? It means understanding that meaning isn't something you find, but something you create through how you relate to your experience. The poet Mary Oliver captured this perfectly when she asked, "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" Your boredom has been asking you this question all along. It has been the persistent reminder that you have not yet answered it fully, that somewhere within you remains the capacity for a more vibrant, more meaningful engagement with existence as you stand at this threshold between disengagement and possibility. Remember that you face a choice that no one else can make for you. You can continue to treat your boredom as an inconvenience to be managed through distraction, or you can recognize it as the call of your own deeper nature, a nature that will not be satisfied with anything less than the full expression of its capacities. The wisdom traditions of the world remind us that we do not just have consciousness in a fundamental sense, we are consciousness. Your capacity for awareness, for attention, for engagement is not just a feature of your existence, but its very essence. When you withhold this engagement, you're not just doing less, you're being less of who you truly are. So, perhaps the most radical response to chronic boredom isn't to find more interesting circumstances, but to become a more interested person, to cultivate the capacity to perceive the extraordinary within the ordinary, to bring curiosity to the familiar, to approach each moment not as something to be endured, but as something to be explored. In the end, your boredom isn't revealing a truth about what's missing in your life. It's revealing a truth about what's present but unexpressed within you, the capacity to transform the quality of your experience, not by changing its contents, but by changing how fully you participate in it. This is your inheritance as a conscious being, not to passively receive experience, but to actively create it through the quality of your attention and engagement. What would happen if you truly lived from this understanding? If you approached each day not as a series of hours to fill, but as a canvas for the expression of your unique potential? What would change if you recognize that your life isn't happening to you, but through you, that you are not just its witness, but its author? This is the invitation your boredom extends, not to escape your life, but to enter it more fully. Not to find distraction, but to discover purpose. Not merely to exist, but to truly live. The choice, as it has always been, remains yours.